I call Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I watched the Minister stand and do quite a bit of shouting and try to justify his failures based on a reflection on history. But of course, every minister will stand and fall on their record. And this minister's record, along with the other two ministers who are also responsible for housing, so the three ministers in this national government, they assigned three. Well, arguably that is why we are in such a disaster. It took three of them to create the legacy of the highest levels of homelessness we have seen in a generation in this country. That's Nick Smith can stand on that record. The lowest rate of home ownership that we have seen in a generation or two. That Nick Smith can stand on that record. Record high prices where the average house now costs $1 million in Auckland. Well, Nick Smith can certainly stand on that record. Yeah, well done, Nick Smith. And increasing rents to the extent that ordinary families are being driven out of rental properties and into homes and cars and garages. Nick Smith can stand on that record.
Well done.
Because he can stand there and argue about history all he likes. New Zealand will look on his time as minister, his history, and rightly judge his failings as a housing minister against the record that he has created. And for all of the posturing and the shouting that goes on, that is his record. And what is his response to that record? His response is this bill, a continuation of a failed policy in Auckland and the removal of property rights from a wide range of New Zealanders, none of whom he could identify when asked about that. So his record of failure will continue, Mr Speaker, and it would just be a usual kind of political issue, I guess, that you would expect of this national government, except that it's not Nick Smith who suffers it. It is thousands and thousands of New Zealand families and young New Zealanders and elderly New Zealanders who are all looking for secure, decent and affordable homes to live in, and in a country as rich and beautiful and resourceful as ours. This government has somehow driven our housing to the worst possible state we could expect, where so many New Zealanders now cannot afford to rent a home or to buy a home. That is the record of Nick Smith, the other two housing ministers appointed to oversee the debacle and this national government as a whole. Sir, I do want to just, in my time in the second reading, which we would have spent had any of this gone to a select committee, we would have spent this period of the debate talking about the effects of this legislation on New Zealanders. We would have heard submissions from people involved in speculation, people who are developers, people who are speculators and investors. We would have heard from families who live around these areas who are concerned about the extent to which they were locked out of consultation because of the fast-track consent process that is built into the special housing areas legislation. We would have heard from those who had provided land to the state for housing areas or for housing or other public works, and who were going to be declined the ability to have the offer back, so would not be offered back the land that they had gifted or provided to the state, and heard about the effect of this bill on them. We would have been able to make a much better assessment of the impacts of this legislation on New Zealanders, because we would have talked with New Zealanders about the bill and its impacts. That is what the Select Committee process is for. That is the core of the democratic approach to legislation that we have built in this country, is that we all in this room might make the final decisions, but we do it after consulting with the country who are impacted by the decisions that we make. That is a core function of us as members of this House of Representatives, that we go out and speak with our people about the laws that we are intending to pass. But of course that is not happening with this legislation, because this government, despite the fact these are substantive issues and we could have spent some time talking with New Zealanders about them, national will not allow those voices to be heard. National has shut down the debate with the public about the impact of the special housing areas and the need for real solutions for the housing crisis. National shut down, or tried to shut down, the homelessness inquiry. The opposition took that on board themselves and went out and spoke with New Zealanders. And now National is trying to shut down any real analysis of the impact of the special housing areas on New Zealanders, their failings and even potentially their advantages. So when we make decisions about this bill today, National can be assured that they do not know what the effect of this bill will be. The National members will vote for this legislation not knowing what the impact will be on New Zealanders because they have deliberately chosen not to listen to New Zealanders' views. That is the approach, that is the value that the National Government holds for our core democratic processes here. The National Government does not want to hear from New Zealanders about the impact of this legislation. Hence, we are in urgency for this bill. Sir, I just want to put on the record about the 3 SOPs that supplementary order papers that the Green Party is putting forward on this legislation as we move from this debate into the committee stages. Just very briefly, we'll go into them in more detail in the committee stages of this bill. The first of the SOPs deletes clause 10, which is the clause that relates to the disposal of state land. So that is the clause that will mean that people will not be offered back the land that they have given to the state for the public purpose. So those people who, this is the clause, we want to delete the clause to protect New Zealanders' property rights where they have provided land to the state for a particular purpose, but this government, National, doesn't want to give it back to them. There is a second one which amends clause 14 of the original legislation. Now, clause 14 of the original legislation defines a qualifying development, and clause 14(1)(d) says that a qualifying development will not contain a percentage, will not contain less than a certain percentage of affordable housing. So it's a little bit oblique as to what that percentage is, and it's certainly oblique as to what the definition of affordable is. So my SOP will change that original legislation to say that, in effect, the definition of affordable housing is a price at or less than 4 times the median household income. Now, 4 times the median household income, it's described as a median multiple in economic language, as a way of describing affordability over the... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a way of describing affordability in a technical way that allows for some flexibility in price because it's related both to income, the median household income, and to the price of housing. It is 4 times the median household income, has been supported actually by the Minister Nick Smith as being about right for an affordable house. But there is no obligation in the special housing areas for homes to be provided at or below that price, and that needs to be changed. And finally, sir, the third SOP will change this bill to allow for the 8 current developers and the 8 special housing areas in Auckland to continue with their consent application process, but will not allow for any further special housing areas to be developed. And the reason for that is that we must not allow this failed policy to continue in Auckland until there are provisions to stop land banking. Unless there are provisions to stop land banking, allowing more special housing areas in Auckland will simply drive up prices and create wealth for land bankers and speculators and not deliver actual affordable homes for New Zealanders to live in. So we have 3 SOPs on the table, sir. They deal with the core concerns that the Green Party has about this bill. We invite members to consider seriously those SOPs and to support them if you agree with us about those concerns. We will at least try to fix this legislation, sir, even if National has done such an appalling job initially. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I call Dennis O'Rourke.